Week 4 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first guy, Matt Gay of the Indianapolis Colts. So Matt Gay, he's gone out there and he put on a monster performance in Week 3. Surprising victory at the Baltimore Ravens. 24 fantasy points in that one, including 4 field goals from 50-plus range. So Matt Gay, we know he's been a solid kicker with the Los Angeles Rams over the last few seasons. And right now with this Indianapolis team, so far this season, 3 fantasy points, 8 fantasy points, and then 24 fantasy points to start the season off. So right now, Week 4 versus former team, the Los Angeles Rams, an indoor game, which obviously is always a good thing here for a kicker. And right now, well, he's available in 91% of fantasy leagues. He's probably going to be a kicker added in a majority of leagues this week after coming off a monster game where he put up 24 fantasy points. You don't even see that from running backs and receivers for most times here. So Matt Gay, after a performance like that, is definitely a top kicker to target this week. The next kicker is Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys. So Brandon Aubrey's been on this list a few times already this season in the early going. And right now, another good performance it was for Aubrey with 9 fantasy points for this Cowboy team. So this Cowboy team, they just can't punch it in the red zone. The offense does get down there, but they can't finish drives with touchdowns. And right now, Aubrey, over the first 3 weeks of his NFL career, has been solid. 7, 16, and then 9 fantasy points. And now Week 4, another matchup here versus the Patriots. That's a bend but don't break type of defense that they're going to make you work to get that touchdown. And they don't give up a lot of touchdowns as well. So right now, while Aubrey's out there in tons of leagues in 54% with a pretty high-powered offense with Dallas and many opportunities, he's definitely a kicker to go out there and get this week as well. The next kicker is Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. So last season, it was a good year for Jason Myers. Top 10 in fantasy points at the kicker position. But so far this season, the first couple games got off to a little bit of a slow start. Week 1 versus the Rams, 8. Week 2 with the Lions, 6. But then Week 3 versus the Panthers, a monster ball game. It was for Myers in that one with 18 fantasy points. So this week here at the New York Giants, Monday Night Football, it's going to be a ball game where I think it's going to be low teens to mid-teens type of ball game between these two teams. You know, the Giants defense hasn't been that great this season, and the Seahawks, they're vulnerable at giving up points. So Jason Myers, he's been an accurate kicker for many years. Like I said, last season, top 10 in fantasy points at the kicking position. And now after coming off an 18-point fantasy day here, he's a kicker I definitely will go out there and get, and he's available in 57% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker is Dustin Hopkins of the Cleveland Browns. Dustin Hopkins was a good pickup here for this Brown team after they had enough for Cade York and they cut him loose and traded for Hopkins from the Chargers. And so far to start this season here, solid ball games. Week 1 versus Cincy, 12 fantasy points. Week 2 with the Steelers, 9. And Week 3 versus Tennessee, 12 fantasy points. So right now, he's getting 9 points or more in the first 3 games here. And this is another team, the Cleveland Browns, where they get in the red zone, but they just don't finish a lot of drives off as well. So right now, well, Hopkins, he's been accurate for the most part in the early going. He's getting many opportunities, 2 or 3 field goal opportunities minimum per game here for this Cleveland Brown team. So right now, well, he's available in 98% of fantasy leagues and a kicker that's amongst the league leaders in fantasy points in the early going. He's definitely a kicker and an ad to add this week. And the final kicker I looked at is Matt Prater of the Arizona Cardinals. So Matt Prater, we know he's a veteran in this league. We know he's been around endless amount of seasons, it seems like, but he still got that big boot, and he showed it versus the Dallas Cowboys in Week 3, where he had 13 fantasy points. I know he's on an offense that isn't all that great, but the chances have been there for Prater. Week 1 at Washington, 11. Week 2 versus the Giants, 9. And Week 3, like I mentioned here, 13 fantasy points versus the Cowboys. So right now, Week 4 at the San Francisco 49ers, it's going to be a ball game where they're going to have to put points on the board as well here. Is this Arizona Cardinal team if they want to keep pace with this high-powered San Francisco 49er offense. So right now, Prater available 97% of fantasy leagues. This is another team here, the Cardinals, that they don't punch it into the end zone a lot, where they got to settle. And I think Prater can help fantasy owners this week. So that's a few kickers I looked at off the wire here in Week 4 of the fantasy football season.